Guys, let me take the time to describe to you the most frustrating feeling in Fortnite. You take the time to practice in creative. You fight your friends, you fight your enemies, you fight everyone left and right, and you do amazing. You pop off, you do really, really good. And for some reason, as soon as you back out of that game and click ranked, it all falls apart. Today, we're going to see that gap. We're going to find out why that is, and we're going to fix it so that you don't have to have this feeling anymore. Today, it's going to be the day that it all changes, and I'm going to outline for you exactly how to do that. Just keep watching. Here's how I would like to frame this problem. The problem stands as such. The first 80% of getting better at the game revolves purely around fighting. And this, in my opinion, can fully be solved in creative. And so we should do that. Why should we do that? Creative offers a really good environment for us to maximize volume. Because in 30 minutes of a ranked game, we really don't have all that many fights that we can take. It might be between 10 to 15 fights. But in comparison, if you look at how many fights you can do in 30 minutes of creative 1v1 realistics, it becomes really obvious that the volume in creative is really, really good. It favors us. And how many fights we get into really does matter. It matters a lot in terms of your improvement and how fast you get good. So why should we need to practice ranked at all? Well, you remember, creative only accounts for the first 80%. The missing 20% really is important for you to perform well in ranked. This is the gap. You need to find out what this gap consists of and what this gap involves so you can solve for it. And then after that, you will be at 100% and you will perform in ranked. And today in this video in rapid fire format, I'm going to tell you the top 10 things that I think will summarize the last 20% so you can finally perform well in ranked and also in tournaments. Let's get right into it. So the first difference between creative and ranked is the fact that in creative, we don't actually have to constantly be aware of our surroundings. We don't need to fight and then check our back. We don't need to roam around and look around for snipers. We don't need to check bushes. We don't need to check the indoors of our houses. And these are things that will catch you off guard if you're not ready for it. And when we practice creative, since we don't have a need for it, we almost condition our brains to build this bad habit of being unaware. And so when we get into ranked, be aware of this difference. Be aware that this exists. We need to fully be aware. And this starts by looking around. You need to look in all directions while you're roaming around. This includes behind you. This includes places you haven't recently cleared. You always constantly need to be looking around, because if you haven't looked in a certain direction for the past 10 seconds and then you get sniped in that direction, then I only have you to blame. Headshot, snipe! It's really, really important that we spot these threats before they start shooting, because that's how we can stop the initial beam and we can stop this advantage that they start the fight with. Huge difference, guys. Write this one down. Make sure you solve for this. The second issue that ranked has that creative really doesn't have a problem of is resource management. Well, then first you might think like, oh, Zycoma, we can just play realistics, right? It has limited mats. True, but realistics is also misleading. The fact of the matter is your opponent and you will not always start with the same amount of mats, and having the skill of trying to guess or make a good judgment call on how many mats your opponent has relative to the duration of the game that has passed thus far is really, really important. It's really important to play differently and contextually in these situations, and you have to adapt to these situations accordingly, because it's really important to play off spawn correctly because you only have 5 builds. It's really important to play the mid game correctly because maybe you're more scuffed than usual, as you would expect someone to be at the 10-minute mark, and you only have 30 builds, but you would expect your enemy to have max mats. And so this promotes more of a 50-50 playstyle because you need to end the fight quickly to have any chance of coming back at all. And so these things are really important. You can't find this in creative. It's just really important to understand, guys. So take note of this one as well. And on to the third. The third difference that creative doesn't have, but ranked has, is rotates and positioning. Zone exists, and zone can absolutely make a difference in your fight. And it's really important to account for it before your fight, during your fight, and after your fight. So it's really important to always check your map and make sure you understand where zone is and what that means for your fight. And check how much time there is before zone starts moving. And which zone it is also matters, because a 1-tick zone is not as threatening as a 5-tick zone. And it's really important to take into account zone in your fights, because this is not something that we have to do at all in creative, but in ranked matches, this is something to consider, because this can then affect your future fights. Because maybe you're good enough to win the current fight, but because it was so scuffed and the fact that zone is pulling super far, you are now tanking storm for super long, which then puts you behind tempo on the game, which then puts you behind on mats, which can then put you into an unfavored fight that you could have solved for had you considered zone before that. Let me put it this way. Here's a golden rule that you can follow for any ranked match there is. Solve for zone first. Just go to zone and then fight in zone. If you just do it in that order almost every single time, you can pretty much solve for zone very easily. And another thing that you can consider is how close zone is. If zone is super close, then of course you can fight outside of zone because you can just take 5 steps and you're in. And so use all of these factors to decide whether you've taken zone into consideration. And if you have, then I think you're going to have a much easier time in ranked because we simply don't have the means to practice this in creative. And so this is going to be a weakness or a gap when we actually hop into the real games. The fourth difference is the fact that we struggle to adapt to loot RNG because we don't have loot RNG in realistics or creative. As a matter of fact, it's perfectly equal. Yes, sometimes maps can have relatively different loot, but there's not really the fact that we need to consider, hey, this chest may not give me what I want. We need to account for that. Right? We need to plan ahead for that. And so off spawn dynamics don't exist in creative. We need to account for that and be aware of it so that we can better be prepared for real games. And so when you do hop into the real game after solving for the first 80%, then you need to solve for this. This is a really missing piece in a lot of people's behavior. They tend to think that, hey, just because I opened 5 chests and ran over 8 floor spawns, I deserve to get a full loadout with full shield. Maybe, but like sometimes that doesn't happen. Plan for this, guys. It's not too hard to plan for. I really believe it. I think as long as you have a decision for when it becomes bad and a decision for when it becomes good, then I think you have really good planning. If you've ever played creative for a prolonged amount of time and you've played 1v1s and you've gotten really good individually, but then you go to play with your friends in a duo, trio, or squad environment, you'll notice that although that you are individually good, it becomes very difficult to track all these people. And that's another difference that makes it very difficult to transfer your creative to ranked games. And I think that this requires some individual practice of tracking. Think about it. In a 1v1 setting, you only need to track one person, and that's your enemy. And in a 2v2 setting, you need to actually track 3 people. Yes, not 2, but 3 people. You need to track both enemies, but you also need to track what your teammates doing and where they're located, because this is part of the decision-making process on what you should do next. This is very difficult for most people, and what I could say to immediately improve this skill is to practice 2v2s in creative. Go to any scrim server, have a duo, and go find 2v2 realistics or 2v2 zone wars or anything fight-based that is 2v2 to help improve this aspect of your game so that when you do go into a real match, it's not going to be alien to you and it's going to be something that you're so comfortable with because of how many reps you put in creative for these 2v2 or even 3v3 fights. Another aspect of making sure that you're absolutely comfortable in a ranked match, even though you've practiced a lot in creative, is understand that the difference can also be within your inventory. In creative, we're given our inventory. We don't get to choose. But when we loot up in a ranked match, we have to understand certain dynamics and certain inventory setups that would really help us play better. For example, if you're playing duos and neither of you are carrying whites in any capacity, that will not be good for you in the long term, because if any one of you guys get cracked and take white damage, then you're not going to be able to heal it to any capacity. Another example of good inventory management is understanding that, hey, if you find 1 big and you find 2 splashes and you have a lot to loot left in your POI, maybe taking the big is actually better because of the fact that bigs have a higher likelihood of spawning in. The likelihood that you're going to get max splashes is really low. So managing this and making sure that you pick up the right item in these situations is really useful. Another thing that you can do with inventory that is just impossible to practice in creative, estimating what the average loot of a player you might run into would look like, because the later in the game it is, the more stacked people actually are in their inventory. But if I'm fighting someone at 3 or 4 minutes, I can expect that person to be really scuffed comparatively to someone at 10 minutes. And so estimating this and having a sort of intuitive feeling for this is really useful, and that's not something that we can guess in creative. Yet another difference that we have is engagement with multiple opponents or the threat of third parties. This is a very difficult one because yes, sometimes there are maps that we can use to practice, but what I'm really referring to here, guys, is talking about third parties when you don't expect them. Because if you were to play a map where third parties are expected, it's a lot easier to defend against that. And a lot of people actually do well on these maps because they're expecting it. But if you're 2v2ing someone or even 1v1ing someone and you're not used to, expecting the third party or the threat of the third party or even looking around to search for them, this is going to catch you off guard and it's going to get you killed for quite a long time until you get used to this. This is not something that you can actually practice in creative. And I really do think that once you've become competent at fighting individually, then going into rank to solve for this thing as well is a much better solution than playing third-party maps, because third-party maps, as I said before, is expected. You know it's coming, so it's not as potent. Sometimes practicing this in ranked or tournaments is a more efficient way of getting this done. Difference number 8 is nervousness or stress. The fact of the matter is, just because a ranked or a tournament match is a much longer game, because we're investing 20 to 30 minutes per match, now we are actually kind of nervous to mess it up. This is a good or bad thing, right? Obviously, it's going to make us play worse, but this is rather not something that we should avoid or ignore, but something to get accustomed to. A lot of people try to lose the stress. They try to get rid of it or ignore it or not feel it, but I disagree. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. Like, the reason you care is because this match is important. So instead of turning it into nervousness, channel the same energy into adrenaline, and that will help you, as long as it's managed well, you know, and not overboard, it will help you perform better. That's what I'm looking for. I really do think that stress can be a positive thing as long as you put it into the right direction and use it to perform better. Difference number 9, guys, is fighting different enemies with different playstyles. You guys know this. Oftentimes when we 1v1 in creative, we have the issue of fighting the same person over and over, so we subconsciously get used to their playstyle. In ranked or in tournaments, we don't have that benefit. And so oftentimes when people finally get individually competent after months and months of training, whether it be through fighting in creative or whatever it might be, they need to get into ranked for that last 20% and really get used to fighting different playstyles, because some people are really cringe with boxing up all the time, and some people are really cringe of jumping right in with super low HP in an unexpected fashion, and you need to be ready for both extremes. Oftentimes I'll hear students talking about, oh my god, this guy jumped in my box and it wasn't a good play, but it worked. Well, it only worked because you weren't ready for it. And so you need to be prepared, because if a pro player faced that person, would they struggle? Would they have trouble? Would they expect it? They absolutely would expect that play coming, because they're constantly thinking about the worst case scenario and are super ready for any and all play styles that the enemy throws at them, because of experience, because of skill, because of their practice. And so when you get into ranked games, expect this to also be a problem, because in creative, all we're used to doing is fighting the same person over and over. And yes, although we can kind of, you know, fight against that by fighting different types of players, it's not the same thing as fighting one player each time that has a completely different playstyle individually. Because in ranked match, we might fight 15 to 20 players, and all 15 to 20 players have a completely different way of taking the game, and that can throw us off. Getting used to that is a skill. And the last difference, guys, but arguably one of the most important differences, is the fact that ping and input delay is a huge difference compared to creative. You don't feel the same way as you do in creative when you hop into a ranked match, and that's key. Getting used to this takes experience and time and volume of practice, just like anything else. Yes, we could, you know, maybe play on Western creative to try to make a fake ping, but honestly, guys, I do think getting used to just playing ranked matches and it doesn't take that long. I really do believe that this is one of the best ways to get used to it. Just play ranked matches. It's not a big deal, because most of the reps or the game sense of fighting or anything that you do practice wise can be done in creative. But then when you go into a ranked match, we're only trying to fix the rest, the small differences there are between creative and ranked. We don't need to practice fighting itself because we fixed all of that, but we're going to try to practice building on 20 higher ping. It's that simple, guys. And honestly, that doesn't take that long. 20 to 30 ranked matches, and I really do think you'll be accustomed to it. So this is partly why I leave it till the end. Mechanically, it's going to be a hindrance, but you have to remember, every person you're fighting is dealing with the same hindrance. They don't have, you know, zero ping like they do on creative. Hopefully knowing that brings you some comfort, and hopefully knowing that actually helps you fight against the other person with some confidence. Guys, there are a lot of small differences between creative and ranked, but one of the most important things that I can tell you is to be aware of them, just like I've listed them out in this video, and try to knock them off your list one by one with practice. Once you genuinely feel like you've knocked it out of the park in terms of fighting, with mechanics, with decisions in fighting, because you've practiced creative so much against better and better players, and you've gotten to that level where you feel really comfortable individually, then solving for these 10 differences in ranked will complete you as a player. And guys, this isn't just for ranked, this is truly for tournaments and scrims as well. Knowing that these things can happen to you in any real match is truly what makes you a great player, because there are so so many creative warriors out there, but a lot of them don't realize their true potential purely because they don't account for these differences, and they truly think that creative is somehow the exact same thing as the real match, when it's not. It's very close, but there are significant differences that need to be accounted for, and once you've practiced these, you are unstoppable. You will be really, really good. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting my channel. This is Zycoma. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment down below as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one.